Now, to everyone who watched my recent video, I want to offer a sincere apology and correction regarding my comments about Mike Coburn's position on Christ's priestly ministry. In my video, I stated that Mike teaches that Christ's seated position at the Father's right hand marks the end of his entire priestly ministry. After reviewing the full context of his presentation, I recognized that this was not an accurate representation of his position. In episode 8, Mike explicitly states that Christ sat down because his sacrificial work was completed and there is no more sacrifice to offer. He also clearly teaches that Christ's ministry of intercession continues. He says the sacrificial phase is complete. He sat down because there is no more sacrificing to do. It is done. Later, he states sacrifice has ended. Intercession continues, and Christ's present heavenly ministry is intercession on our behalf. That's Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25. And those are the words of Mike. Now, because of this, I acknowledge that I misrepresented his view. Okay. I thought he said the finished work at the cross meant Jesus' work as high priest or priest in heaven stopped. That's what I thought he said. And my video responded as though he was teaching that Christ ceased being our high priest altogether when he explicitly affirmed Christ's continuing intercessory ministry. For that misrepresentation, I sincerely apologize to Mike Coburn and to everyone who watched my video. It is important that we represent one another's position accurately, even when we disagree on other theological issues. This does not necessarily mean that I agree with every aspect of Mike's overall theology or conclusions. However, I do believe it is my responsibility to correct the record whenever I have attributed to someone a position they do not actually hold. Mike, your clarification is appreciated. We agree that Christ's sacrificial offering was completed once for all at the cross, and that his intercessory ministry continues. The remaining point of disagreement is whether Hebrews leaves room for a distinct Day of Atonement phase of Christ's heavenly ministry. I believe it does.
Hebrews tells what Christ does now. Before the Father's holy throne, high priest pleading day by day, ministering till he comes. Yet Hebrews never says at all no further work could yet unfold. Read the whole word line by line. Daniel and Hebrews side by side. Cross complete, the Lamb has won. Still he serves till all is done. Let the scriptures speak as one. till the Savior's work is done. He sat down when the cross was won. One sacrifice forever done. Its psalm declares he still remains a priest forever, king who reigns. The blood was shed, but still applied. God's redeeming plan unfolds in time. Day of Atonement, not a new cross, only the merits of the sacrifice. The question waits in Daniel's page, what does 14 truly say? Hebrews doesn't close that door. Search the scriptures, seek the Lord. Read the whole word, don't divide. Truth shines brighter side by side. Christ still serves before the throne till redemption's work is known. Hebrews speaks and Daniel too. Let God's word reveal the truth.
The book of Hebrew uses this seated posture of Christ to signal or to mark the finished priestly work. Again, the entire book, friends, talks about how Christ is better than. So he sat down because the sacrificial phase, I don't like the phase work if you take the two-stage atonement theory into it, but the sacrificial phase is complete. He sat down because there is no more sacrificing to do. He sat down because purification for sins has already been made. It is done. Now, the SDA sanctuary system requires Christ to have not finished his sacrificial priestly work, at least in some sense of the word. There is something that has to continue to go on. To have an ongoing Day of Atonement typological ministry that began in 1844. So a seated Christ cannot be on his way somewhere or doing something. And tonight, as we engage, we're going to look at how Hebrews, the seated Christ, closes the SDA structural move inside of this overarching conversation about the sanctuary and the investigative judgment. I want to look at these with clarity, okay? The seated posture follows the completed sacrificial work. The entire main point of Hebrews, I want you to notice this. The entire main point is that Christ's high priesthood, his priesthood, is a seated priesthood. He is seated. He is not standing. There is no more stuff going on inside the extra compartment. He has a seated priesthood. He's not a Levite. He's after the line or the line of Melchizedek. A single sacrifice for all time. He's seated. He is in a seated posture, if you want to hold the typology. Endured the cross. He has taken his seat. He's already seated. That seated posture is telling you something about the theology of what is happening or what happened. The cross preceded the seated posture. The seated posture is the consequence or the effect of the cross. So 4 times, as the song said, 4 times he sat down, seated, sat down, has taken his seat. I want you to notice that each text connects the seated posture. It's very clear. In every single case, the seated posture follows. And this is the theological consequence of the completed sacrificial work at the cross. The posture is not incidental. The posture is theological. He is not a standing priest. He is a seated priest king. And it flies in the entire face of this 2-phase bifurcated atonement theory that is an argument from silence.
The main question is simple. Does Hebrews say Jesus cannot have another phase of his ministry in heaven? The following points look at what Hebrews says and what it does not say to see if it leaves room for the ministry described in Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. Point number 1. Hebrews does not say Jesus only intercedes in heaven. Hebrews tells us that Jesus ministers in the heavenly sanctuary. Jesus appears before God for us. Jesus intercedes for believers. He serves as our high priest, and he will return after his heavenly work is complete. Now, what does this mean? Hebrews tells us what Jesus is doing in heaven, but it never says these are his only priestly duties. It also never says another phase of his ministry cannot happen before he returns. So, Hebrews does not rule out a later day of atonement ministry. If Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 teaches such a ministry, Hebrews does not contradict it. Point number 2. Jesus sitting down does not mean all his priestly work ended. Okay, there you see in some say that because Jesus sat down after his sacrifice, his priestly work was completely finished. But Hebrews only say he sat down because his sacrifice was complete. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 12. And Psalms 110 shows this clearly. Jesus sits at God's right hand. That's verse 1. And then verse 4. He is priest forever. So what does this mean? Jesus' seated position shows his sacrifice is finished. It does not say all his priestly work is finished. Now, a good question is, where does Hebrews say that because Jesus sat down, no new phase of his priestly ministry can ever begin? Where? Therefore, we should not add a limitation to Scripture that Hebrews itself does not teach. Point number 3. The Day of Atonement was not another sacrifice. Adventists agree that Christ's sacrifice was completed at the cross. On the Day of Atonement, The Lord's goat was sacrificed only once. The high priest did not offer another sacrifice inside the sanctuary. Instead, he entered the most holy place with the blood that had already been shed to cleanse the sanctuary. No hands were laid on the Lord's goat before it was slain. The laying on of hands occurred only on the live goat Azazel after the sanctuary had been cleansed. So that means Jesus died once for all at Calvary, Passover typology. Okay? His sacrifice never needs to be repeated. A Day of Atonement ministry would not be another sacrifice. It would be another phase in applying the benefits of his one completed sacrifice. Point number 4. Hebrews shows that Christ's heavenly ministry continues. Hebrews says Jesus entered heaven and now serves there. It also points to the future. Jesus will appear a second time. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 28. His work continues until God's plan is completed. Now that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 24 to 28. So when Jesus finished his work as a priest in heaven, he comes, the second coming, he returns. So this means Hebrews presents an ongoing heavenly ministry that continues until just before Christ returns. Point number 5. Hebrews does not deny later phases of Christ's ministry. Some argue that because Hebrews never mentions 1844, the investigative judgment, or 2 apartments, these teachings cannot be true. But Hebrews also never mentions Pentecost, Passover, Daniel's 70 weeks, the millennium. Passover, yes, it was mentioned. Christ finished the sacrificial work at the cross. That's Passover. But Pentecost, Daniel's 70 weeks, the millennium, are also never mentioned in the book of Hebrews. So that means Hebrews teaches that Jesus is our perfect high priest and that his sacrifice is complete and sufficient. But it was not written to explain every detail of his heavenly ministry or to interpret Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. To understand the full picture of Christ's heavenly ministry, we need to study Daniel and Hebrews together. Hebrew was not made to explain Daniel's to fit Daniel's frame, or to talk about the Day of Atonement typologies. Nope. That is not what Hebrew was made for. Okay? Now the real question is Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. The issue is not whether Jesus still ministers in heaven. The issue is, does Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 teach a cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary after the ascension of Jesus, after Christ's ascension? If it does, then Christ's seated position in Hebrews cannot be used to deny it, because Hebrews never says his priestly ministry has no future phases. Hebrews never says that the priestly ministry of Jesus has no future phases. So, to summarize it, Hebrews teaches that the heavenly ministry of Jesus, that Christ's sacrifice. Hebrews teaches that the sacrifice of Jesus was finished once for all, that Jesus is seated at God's right hand, and that he continues serving as our high priest and continually intercedes for believers, and his heavenly ministry continues until God's plan of salvation is completed. The main question is whether Daniel chapter 8 verse 14, together with Hebrews, reveals a final phase of Christ's heavenly ministry before his second coming. Hebrews does not deny that possibility.